do my usual thing, which is to say that I'm Sara Tucker. This is the Kansas Legislative Women Oral History Project. You are Joan Hamilton.
Right.
Representing the 51st District, which is essentially Topeka, one part of Topeka.
Right, the western part of Topeka. There's some of the city districts right behind Wanamaker Road, and then I go to a lot of the little towns, too. Auburn,
okay,
Andover, Rossville, Silver Lake,
you do.
Wakarusa.
Wakarusa, okay.
Yes. And so I go from north 75 highways, basically, all the way to the county, all the way to the West County line, and all the way to the South County line along Barrington Road.
Okay, thank you. And I want to make sure that you understand that this will produce a transcript. You will have a chance to look at the transcript and make a change if you feel it necessary, but that then a transcript will be given to you. One will be on deposit at the Kansas State Historical Society, one at Washburn University, and it will be used for scholarly research.
Oh, great.
We hope. Let me start at the political beginning. How did you come to first get interested in politics?
Well, I've been involved in politics only because I've been on the other side, requesting legislation and legislative issues to be heard when I got involved in community issues when I was an assistant DA, and there were child issues that came up, sexual assault issues, since I was the first woman DA, assistant DA in the county, and fighting for equalization there. I had been a teacher, and I saw that there was a lot of inequities for children, inequities for women. So I was on that side of the other stand, requesting bills to be passed. And then indirectly I was involved in politics because I supported certain candidates, though I didn't consider myself real political. I got involved in John Carlin's campaign because he was from my hometown and I knew him. I grew up in Lindsborg, and John grew up in Smolin, and so indirectly I just knew this man who was running for governor, so I got involved. Because when my name came up for an appointment in 1983 by Governor Carlin, he really hadn't considered me till my name surfaced, and then he says, well, I even know her. So I got a political appointment, though again I was not really actively politically accepting certain people's campaign because they went along with my cause. And it didn't make any difference party-wise either, Democrat or Republican, because though I was a very big supporter of John Carlin, I was also a very strong law enforcement and victims' rights, so I was a very strong supporter of the Attorney General, Bob Stephan, and on task force for him. So it was mainly the issue and the person rather than just the party. Then I lost my appointment in 1989 when Governor Hayden decided not to reappoint me to the board.
You want to spell that out? You were...
I was on the Kansas Parole Board appointed by the governor in 1983. I filled the unexpired term of a member that had been asked to resign. And then I was reappointed for another 4-year term. So I stayed on the parole board for 5.5 years. My appointment then would expire in 1989, and Governor Hayden could have reappointed me to another 4-year term and chose not to, which I again expected. Then there were some real frustrations during that time as just trying to get back. I like public service work. I like serving the people and being a voice for them, so I just decided when the position became available, and I'd been asked different times to run for it, representative, and I thought Ginger Barr had been doing an excellent job, so I really didn't want to run against her, but when she decided not to run, I thought, this is an opportunity to get back into public service work.
So, Ginger Barr is a Republican, you are a Democrat. At some point, then, you became a Democrat, or have you always been a Democrat?
I've always been a Democrat, though there's been a lot of people who have felt philosophically I was a Republican because of my strong law enforcement, and that's usually and conservatism, which is usually associated with being a Republican. But I've always been a Democrat. I've never changed parties. I've never been an independent. I've always been a Democrat from the first time I registered to vote. So, and I was a young Democrat at Washburn University when I went to undergraduate school and law school there. So, again, a lot of people have thought I'm considered a conservative Democrat. And for Kansans, I've really found there's a real thin line between a Democrat and a Republican.
So let me ask you the question I ask everybody, only varying it by party. Why are you a Democrat?
I think during my formative years as an adolescent, John F. K. was a big image person in my mind, and he was assassinated when I was in junior high school, which has always been a big impact on me. But I was at that age of being an adolescent and involved in politics and history that he made a great deal of difference to me, and he was a Democrat. And though philosophically Democrats in different parts of the country have been much too liberal for my view, I basically like what they stand for, and that is I associate that more with people issues, children issues, and equality issues, rather than big business, high bucks, and economic development, as that word has become so popular. Though I'm not opposed to economic development, I just feel like priorities should be children, people, and like education.
So you made that leap, at least for some people it's a leap, to go from being involved in politics to being the candidate. Was that a big leap for you?
I didn't think so at the time, but as I got into campaigning and as a politician now, it was a very big leap. It's an experience that I think, again, people don't understand the work it takes and the commitment it takes till you get into it. And I am a person that, when I get into a project, I commit myself. Again, I've been in positions as a prosecutor. I was basically, even though there was a lot of discouraging times, I basically was on the, quote, right side, and worked for victims and victims' rights and families. As a parole board member, it was a little harder. My skin got thicker during that period of time because there was never a right decision. I mean, if you let the inmate out, then the victims in the community might be upset. If you didn't let them out, then you were too tough and you were too oriented. So I got used to being in a position where you're never going to satisfy anyone. As a politician, you're in the same type of position as far as having it, but the big leap is that the weight of responsibility is you really want to please and help everybody. There's no way to present everybody's position with only this one vote.
Okay. So let me just spell out what we're both assuming. Ginger Barr decided not to run, therefore there is an open seat. You have a situation where a female Republican you felt had been doing a very good job, and you ran and won. First of all, did you have to fight to get the chance to be the Democrat who ran?
Yes, I had during the primary there were three of us who ran, so I had a heavy primary, and the Democrats are basically very poor in Kansas, so we were basically I was told as a candidate that I was on my own. You know, as soon as the primary determination was made, there would be some support, but basically I was on my own to run the campaign and do a very little guidance as to what do you do. I'm a very good organizer and had friends, so that helped out, but it was pretty overwhelming with all the tedious aspects of it. And I knew, too, I went into it blindly, which was probably good, as far as didn't go through all the statistics as to the demographics of the precincts and the district, knowing that afterwards, people told me it was 2-to-1 Republicans. That didn't really soak in until like halfway through the general that this is really going to be difficult. I'm really going, I basically went to it thinking, again, not being a politician, though I've been involved indirectly with politics, thinking, oh, people will just vote for the right person, the right experience. I've done lots for my community. I've fought for issues. They'll see that I'm a fighter, and you basically feel that way and think, party won't make that much difference. Little things won't make that much difference. They'll really look to see what type of person you are. I think that was it was a good thing that I went in with those rose-colored glasses, because had I known the true realities of what might have occurred, I might not have had the courage to take that step to file.
Well, you did win the chance to be the Democrat. How did you do that? How did you get to be the Democrat who ran?
One of my biggest mentors was Joan Adam. I mean, I sat down and said, can I really do this? Am I really the person keyed up to be a legislator? You've been a legislator for a long time. I admired the things you can do. And she said, even if you lost, you will find the experience something that will be extremely good and a good experience for you to write down in your history book. You can't really be a loser even if you lose the election. So she mapped out in a 3-hour period of time as to sort of what would be expected of me during the campaign. And basically I went home that night thinking, driving home, what have I gotten myself into? I can't do this. I can't handle it. Then I thought, my gosh, I've done first-degree murder trials. I've dealt with important issues. Surely I can organize a campaign. And I think basically because I'm the type of person that likes to, again, my background is being an attorney and being an organized person from a large family, a supportive community, a supportive family, that I just decided I'm the type of person that dots every I. And instead of thinking, well, that'll be taken care of, or assuming something like these are friends, so they'll vote for me, or these are educated people, they'll vote for the person, I just said, no, we're going to just start here and do as much as we can with every hour, and mapped it out. And I think walking door to door, again, putting out, every time an idea came up, a group said, we'll support you, I'd go right to them and say, would you follow that up with a letter, and follow up postcards, responding to people who called, whether the aspect was something being very minute to them. I found that when I was a prosecutor, though many of my colleagues did not do it, nor my boss, to communicate with victims and victims' family is a very difficult situation. I never handled a trial without first talking with my witnesses and my victims, and to find out and let them know what might happen and what could happen and what their desires were. And that was not required by law. And I found that even if we lost a case, that the fact that I communicated with them before made all the difference. There was no anger, there was no resentment, there was that communication, whether the answer was satisfactory or the result was, because I was willing to communicate with them. And that's what I found with the voters. They might not have liked what I stood for or what I said to them when they said, what's your view on this issue, the death penalty or abortion or one of those hot issues. The fact that I gave them why and the reason, and gave them an answer rather than saying, well, what do you think and what do you feel should be it, and not really giving them an answer. That made a difference to them.
How were you able to do all of this? Were you working full-time while you did this?
Well, at that point I had lost my appointment, so I was practicing privately, and so I was able to take those cases which I wanted to take and those cases which I didn't. And I was just privileged enough to have be able to do that with a husband who was working full-time, because it is a tedious type process. I did have a sitter that would come in the afternoons, because I had 3 children at home too that I was, during that period of time, they were out of school, and so that was trying to keep up with that, and then enough cases to keep afloat and pay for a campaign, because also as a newcomer, you don't have the privileges of all those people giving you those contributions, and a campaign is expensive. And that's the part I would say was my least favorite.
Would you talk about that? How expensive was it? What did you do?
I would have liked to have had more money, but I ran the campaign hoping that I could run the campaign on anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000, and you have to be able to have money up front to put into it if you're not going to get contributions. And what made my campaign, of course, more expensive than maybe somebody else's is that I had there were three of us running in the primary, so where a lot of people were able to slide through that first period of time, that was very crucial for me. I had to win that. Once I got through that first stage, did receive a little bit more contributions, because then, of course, they're at least dealing with a Democrat rather than three Democrats. But campaigning, there are just, that's an expense that I would like to see cut down. Throughout the state, talking to other freshmen, many of them didn't spend a third of what we did in Shawnee County. But I was also in a very Republican district, and a district in which they did not want to lose their Republican candidate. And Republicans, again, just historically, have had more money to give than Democrats. And the party obviously did. My opponent was given money up front plus a fundraiser, and any fundraiser that I had, I set up myself or friends set up, and we were in charge of it. Now, fortunately, because the Democrats really started helping us out during the general, the Speaker's house, Marvin Vargas's office, because he didn't have an opponent, they gave us then some people to help us with some guidance as to what we should do. And that helped out greatly.
Greatly, it sounds like it. Who was your opponent?
Mike McCrite.
Why did you beat him?
I think basically because I worked harder. I didn't assume that I was going to win, but I wanted to win. Maybe it was a desire to win. Also on Serve the People, I was able to withhold the pressures of campaigning. Where Mr. McCrite made his mistake was he could have easily walked into the situation, just the numbers during the primary. He had more votes, even if he just got a few of his opponent during the primary, and he were very close. But even if he only received a fourth of the votes of what his opponent was, he could have beat me without me gaining every single independent vote in the district, as well as a great number of Republicans. But part of the problem was maybe his confidence. He didn't get out and work the first month of the campaign, took a break from it, and I went back right out after 1 week and started walking the doors that I hadn't visited. And then I was able, again, when special interest groups came with real pressure as to this is the way we want to do it or you won't get our votes and so forth, I was able to say, I'm sorry, but these are my values or my morals, or this is the way I believe this way. Should the district, otherwise, all the district, or majority of them, want me to go someplace else, I realized I had to represent the district. But I wasn't wavered according to the groups we went into. I mean, we had to present ourselves at a lot of forums. And what I was finding towards the end particularly was I was hearing two different things from my opponent. I was hearing it, and I, as a person in the district, I was getting very concerned that, not as his opponent, but just as the fact that this person is saying something to this group because we're talking to this group, and the next night we would be someplace else and he would say something else that was contrary to what he said in the group before. And though the paper only picked up on the issue of parental notification and abortion, there were 4 major issues that Mr. McCrite had changed his position on with different groups. And
what were they?
To the Citizens for Fair Taxation and Responsible Citizens, we had a taped interview like you have here, in which he had supported and said he would support initiative and referendum. Okay, that was a very important issue, of course, for the governor and that group. And publicly then, at another forum in which we had a newspaper reporter, Roger Myers was there, he then said he was not for it. Now, that group was not there to hear that, but I was there to hear it, and his position had been recorded, so it was hard for him to back off. I mean, one can change their mind, but he did more than that. Prevailing wage, he indicated, and that was an important issue for Ginger Barr to support him with, because we have a lot of labor people out there, and there were no promises, as I understand, that he do exactly what Ginger Barr had wanted him to. But two issues that were important in that district was prevailing wage and the abortion issue. Because labor then supported me, decided to support me. Mr. McCright said he didn't know if he was for prevailing wage, and that didn't make labor very happy. Another one, of course, was the big, he campaigned very strongly against his opponent during the primary. That was the main issue with Ken Willard. Ken Willard was a pro-life candidate. Mike McCright was a pro-choice, all the way pro-choice. He even said he was for abortion on demand. Then all of a sudden in a public forum he indicates that he may go along with, first of all, he changed his position totally on parental notification. He was now for it. His eyes had been opened up, and he realized the importance of it. And second of all, he could even go along with a third trimester abortion. Well, had he voiced those positions during his primary, he might not have won that close race. And that, again, very much upset some of the Republicans who had strongly supported Mike with the promise that, I mean, not just a promise, that was his position, and all of a sudden he switched it. Then one of the crucial things as far as our district, the 51st District has 6 school districts in it. Unification is a word that comes up a lot of times, and for a lot of representatives in Topeka, it doesn't mean much because they're in one school district, 501, but we are in 6. And many of our people have gone out west so that they won't be in a big, huge district of 501. Unification was asked in the questions whether we would be in favor of it. Again, he had on recording said no, of course not. And then in a public forum indicated that unification is exactly what we needed in the district to save on financial aspects. That is one question during the public forum in Silver Lake in which we were allowed to ask one question of our opponent. And he asked me a real general question. I then confronted him with the fact that 2 nights prior to that, he had indicated that he was for unification of schools, and I wanted to know what his plan was as to how much money that would save and what schools he would seek to unify first. He then tried to sort of backstep on his answer by saying he didn't really mean unification of schools at the prior forum, but what he meant to say was that he thought unification of administrators was necessary. The schools quickly picked up on that, and again, unification and education is extremely important, at least in our district it is, and the parents and people are very involved in that, and so that might have helped with the win, because I was predicted to lose by quite a bit.
This is interesting because a lot of people I talk to, when I say what issues were involved, they say, well, you know, there really weren't any major issues. It was all, and you're describing partly personality, or at least perception of standing for something, but you're also describing some very real issues, and that is interesting.
The tax issue, though, is very, very big in Kansas, and that was probably, as I walked door to door, was probably the biggest concern as far as needing property tax relief there was really no conflict there. It was just a matter of the difficulty of the subject and being able to understand it. And some people would say, well, are you going to promise anything? I didn't promise during my campaign anything except for one issue, and that was to repeal the pension plan. And as a state worker of 17 years, I felt that that was a real crime to the Kansans, and I knew as an attorney that any law could be repealed, whatever the legislators were saying. And though if I was elected, I could have benefited from that, I thought that it was a real sham on Kansans. Plus, every time I would speak to someone in regards to the pension plan, many of them said that they didn't realize that what they had voted, they voted. And that to me was scary. That then you shouldn't have done that, or you should have sought yourselves to repeal this. So that is one of the first bills I have co-sponsored, is the repeal of the pension plan.
Let me then ask you, how do you define this job you've gotten yourself? What is involved with being a good representative in the legislature and of your constituents?
I think it's like any other my other jobs that I've done, and that's why I enjoy being a public servant, though it can be frustrating, and that is being accountable to the people that you are here to serve. Now, it's a little bit more, I think, accountability being a legislator that represents a particular district, because as a pro board member, I represented Kansans generally and had to make a decision, but I wasn't accountable to any particular type people. Plus, they couldn't get rid of me if I didn't do my job. It was a matter of appointment. I mean, they could write, but it wasn't a matter of them voting me out. I think communicating with and doing constituent services, and you can really get wrapped up, and the committees are tedious, the reading. I'm glad that I'm not a very fast reader, but at least I can comprehend, and the reading is just humongous stacks of it, and the capacity of what you're expected to know every detail of is something, I don't understand how a person can possibly understand 1/10 of what we're expected to. And I think that's the difficulty in being able to say to your constituents or your service, when they call up and say, we want you to tell us what's happening here and tell us what the bill is and the background and so forth, that you're able to say, I'm not in that issue, but I'll find the answer for you. I will do it the best I can, and you also can come up here and voice your own opinion. I don't have to do it. Letting them know that their voice is important. I've had many of them that I've called up now when they call and say, oh, I didn't expect to hear from you. And so it's, again, communication and accountability, and they might not like the answer you give them, or they might not like the fact that you voted a certain way. But being able to tell them why you did it, and that's the way you did it, and not apologize for that.
You're a freshman, a first-year freshman, whatever that is. So asking you how you're going to get things done in the legislature is asking a lot of you to answer. Nevertheless, how do you have a game plan? Do you have a philosophy of how to be an effective legislator here?
I think that's probably one of the most frustrating parts of it, or overwhelming, is that you are a freshman, and so for other legislators you are considered a freshman who have been around, and in some areas, because of your experience and your background, you're able to really come in and give them far more knowledge than they have available to them or have had. So as far as plan, I sit back and listen, but my training also shows me that if I have a question, I ask. And if I see a plan that I don't think is right or doesn't appear to go right, I'm one that will speak out. But if I don't know the issue, I'm not one to just barge in and say, this is the way it should be done. I listen to the leadership. I listen to where we're going, or where the governor would like us to go, and where Kansans would like us to go. Yet I take my actual experience and knowledge I have, and I have been pretty vocal in those areas in which I feel like in real life. This is the way it works, guys. It looks good on paper. And that's why you'll see in the paper where I have spoken up on issues such as victim legislation and on the Sentencing Commission. I mean, that's going to be an astronomical move for Kansans to change philosophically what we're doing with prisoners. In effect, that will affect the lives of Kansans and victims. And I have seen a reaction, an overreaction. In my 17 years in law enforcement, I've seen an overreaction already where we've gone in after the fact, overreacted, and gotten ourselves in trouble, or didn't know that the bill would have this effect, and it has. And this is so major that where I'm speaking out, and I may get voted down, I have to realize that I've done what I can say, but again, it's something in which it looks superb on paper, and it looks really good, but in reality, I've been to every one of those places. I've dealt with corrections and probation and prosecution and judicial decisions and the institutions and the prisons, and then the inmate and the parolee. I mean, I've been through that stage, so the plan is to sort of say, please try and believe the experience here to know what's going to happen.
Would you say you have any mentors or any people you pattern yourself after?
Well, again, and we were asked if we would list a mentor we wanted, and Joan Wagnon was one of them. Though we're philosophically a lot of difference in some areas, such as law enforcement, I really admire her energy and the fact that she's the type of person too that likes to take tons of information and then try and sliver them down or sift them out to the important issues. And she has people, and she's very accountable to people, and she's, so I would say she's one of my strongest mentors. And then as I meet people here, from other parts of Kansas, the wealth of knowledge and experience we have, I think, I'm impressed with. And the freshman class that we have, I think more people that are being involved in the legislature are being involved because we want to, not because of salaries or anything, but because it makes a difference. And I think you see that in the Cal.
All right, we're back.
Yeah, I think you would see, I've been just really impressed with the educational background and the knowledge that people have that have brought it into the legislature. It's not like maybe years past where you've had a professional politician. I mean, that's been sometimes where you've seen where a person hasn't really been out in the true life. They've just sort of grew up and become politicians and been politicians the whole time. So working with, there's a lot of freshmen that have been specifically in that area. And an example is our judicial system. I mean, our Judiciary Committee. Out of the 21 members, there are 18 lawyers. Yet, when you count them down as to, there's so many different areas of law, and like only about 3 of us have practiced in the extent of criminal law. So, when garnishment issues or tax issues or something comes up, I really feel confident to go to those other members and say, I've never worked in that area, tell me all about it, and what's the pros and cons. And instead of just sort of flittering around like you've heard other prior legislators who years past had said, we had no idea what this was all about.
Let me move to a different track then. You're Kansan. You grew up around Lindsford. Tell me about your original family, what your parents did, whether there were a lot of strong women out there holding jobs outside of the home. Where do you come from?
Well, I come from a very strong family. My mother was a professional woman as I grew up, and my father was very supportive of that, and I guess they were way before their time. I thought that all families grew up like that. I have 4 brothers and sisters, I have 3 sisters. One's a twin sister, and I have a brother who's younger. My mother was born and raised in Lindsborg. She's a Swede 100%, and her parents came over from Sweden. My grandmother and grandfather are dead. I never met my grandmother, but my grandfather I knew. And my folks still live in Lindsborg. My father just recently retired. He was from Illinois, a Catholic from a large family. He met my mother during when she was a cadet nurse down in Florida, and he was in the Air Force. And so my oldest sister was born in Florida while they were in the service. And then they came back to Lindsborg. And I have a sister, Connie lives in Florida, went back there after she married, and she raised her family first. She is even a grandmother, though she's only 4 years older than I am. And so she started her family young and then went back to school and got a preschool education. My sister in Colby is 2 years older than I am, and she's a special education teacher. And then I went to college thinking I was going to be a home ec teacher, so it changed severely, and then became an elementary education teacher, and then I went to law school, probably because law school was about the furthest from a mine in Lindsborg. Can't conceive of having a lawyer, me as a lawyer, because I was a cheerleader and all that in high school. But I met my husband in undergraduate school. We've been married 21 years. I was married at 19 and he was just 21. And he went to law school, and basically it was one of those things in which I was teaching school, getting through school, and then taught elementary school, and had enrolled in a legal secretarial school because I couldn't understand the jargon that was talked about. And he then came home with an application to law school and said, why don't you just go? And so I grew up and my brother works at Boeing in Wichita. My twin sister is in Salina, and she's a nurse. And she just finished her master's and is a nurse practitioner. But we grew up in a family in which education was extremely important. Even my father, who just done a high school education, really promoted education. He felt that any bit of education would help us get further in life. So, and Lindsborg is a very arts place, but it's very education and place where it's promoted culture and education. So I basically grew up in high school and everything, not saying, what would you do after high school? It was, what school do you go to after high school? I mean, my class was a small class of 58. Most of the classes were only like 70, though. And 90% of your classes went to college. I mean, that was just the way it was. And I didn't realize that until you went off to college and you realize that many high school classes don't promote the education as Lindsborg did. So I grew up in a family where that was extremely important. My mother was a nurse for 17 years and then went back and got her degree at Bethany at the time. My twin sister and I graduated from 8th grade. That's when you graduate from 8th grade. My oldest sister from high school and my mother from college. All the same year. I remember being featured in the Lindsborg newspaper. So she then became a social worker in 1964 and is still with SRS. She was regional director down in Saline County. And just turned 65 last year, so expecting her to retire, but I don't know that she wants to. So again, very involved in the community. When it's a small community like that, you were able to do everything. Very strong Lutheran. And Luther League and 4-H and cheerleader and band and orchestra and chorus and sang in the Messiah chorus, and you just, in the community like that, you were just involved in a lot of that. So that strong community orientation is probably, I entered an essay contest when I was a junior in high school and got a scholarship to Washburn University. Had never heard of Washburn University.
I was going to ask you why you didn't go to Bethany.
Well, one reason I didn't go to Bethany, though, almost like my second father, was recruitment. director at that time, was Bethany in 1968, when I graduated from high school, was basically all fine arts, and I did want to be a teacher. And though they, of course, got a very good teacher education then, the only reason I wasn't was because I wanted to be a teacher, but I had always geared myself to K-State.
Mm-hmm.
In Lindsborg, that was probably one of the tendencies. Everyone either went to KU, K-State, or Bethany. But we had 3 in our family going to college that year, and so I told Mom and Dad, since I got this scholarship to Washburn, though I didn't know anything about it, that I would go my first semester to Washburn, and then they promised that I could transfer down to K-State if I didn't like it. And that's when I met my husband.
Well, any way we could please you, we're glad we did it.
And so, I mean, if it hadn't been for that, I'm sure I wouldn't be where I am in law school or anything, because we would have never thought about that. Plus, there were 3 of us girls who got all married in the same year, too.
Good heavens.
All got married in 1970. So my folks went through 3 of us in college and 3 of us getting married within a 2-year span, and now I know what I did to them. But
so you told me about your husband. He's an attorney. He
right.
practices here in town.
Yes.
You have 3 children?
Yes.
How old are they now?
Well, Jan and I were married 10 years before we decided to start a family, and we don't regret that, except maybe our energy levels would have been higher at a younger age. But we wanted to complete school and get established before we started our family, and so we then started our family in 1979. So Ryan is 11, he'll be 12 in August. Jacob will be 9 years old now, February 27th, so this next week. And Allison is 5 and a half, and she'll start kindergarten next year. She's a September baby. So I worked full-time with all 3 babies. And the first baby, we had the luxury of Jan was in private practice. I was at the DA's office. So he would stay home till noon with, he really has been a supportive husband, father, sort of like my father was to my mother. And he stayed home with Ryan till noon and then took him to the sitter, and I picked him up at 5. And so Ryan was only at a sitter for about 4 hours. And then he worked at nights. And we were able to do that the first one. It got more difficult than with the second and third. But
how do you work this out, being a legislator, running campaigns? Of course, I realize you're still finding out if it works, but 3 children, those ages, that's got to be a tremendous challenge.
Again, the support from Jan, and it does get tedious, and we have 4, 5, 6 invitations a night, I've just made it a rule to be accountable to my constituents and people, but since I am in Topeka, they do have an opportunity to make contact with me. So I accept invitations on Tuesday and Thursday nights. My husband has always worked and had his, quote, night out on Tuesday nights to get caught up on things or relief. Mine has always been on Thursday to do community activities or catch up on work. And so I accept invitations on those nights, and anything like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is saved to be at home. The kids are in piano, Suzuki piano. My oldest one takes Suzuki violin. We like to swim at the Y together and do sports together, so I feel that that's part of what's important too as being a legislator, is that I have to be able to relate to the fact that they're family and they have demand, and they have to understand that I'm a wife and mother as well as a legislator. And, there's a lot of coordination there that goes into it. And weekends, again, I try, if there's questions, and I have an answering machine and people don't like that, but I can, at least they get their message delivered to me, and I try and get the answer to them. Yet it affords me the time to spend that time with the family.
How would your children have handled it if you'd lost? Would they have been real upset? Did you worry about that at all?
Well, I did. actually, my husband during the campaign just sort of didn't deal with it. I mean, the campaign was mine, and the kids were actually more actively involved with it. And part of it was his fear that he didn't think I would take the loss, and it would have been difficult. But I think probably the crucial one was probably Jake, the 9-year-old. He was so into my campaign, it was just, there was no way I was going to lose. And it sort of reminded me of when he tried out, when he was 5 years old, he tried out for King and I at Washburn Rural, and going to the tryouts, we were saying, you know, there are other kids and you might not get it. And it was sort of like, well, why wouldn't I get it? And then he got it. So, you know, trying to explain to him that you might not have, and, you know, someone else. And there was never a doubt in their mind. Now, I think Allison was just young enough at 5 that she understood the work, and she wanted me to be up in this big building. But I don't know what it would have done to her. But I think, and my 11-year-old Ryan is sort of quiet, and he just wanted me to be successful in it. So I think it probably, quietly, it would have affected him, but it would have crushed Jake. And so we talked a lot of times about, you know, I lost my appointment when Governor Hayden decided to do it, you know, because they'd always say, did you get fired? And we'd have to talk about, you know, there are some times when someone else is better than you are, or you choose to have to go on your way and do something else. So it's a little harder it was a little harder for him to understand, but I'm just glad I didn't have to go through that, because they're so proud of it now, and they're so involved with it that it's been great.
Is that going to be a problem? That I presume you're expecting that you will probably run again and so on. Are you going to be able to keep on doing this?
Yeah, right now the campaigning was really tedious. You know, I don't really look forward to having to start all that again, though I really enjoy the aspect of meeting people and doing that. The other aspects of yard signs and all those mailings is not something that I'm looking forward to. But regardless, right now my concentration is just making sure that if I do everything that I feel is correct now, I feel that it will go a lot smoother. So it won't be so foreign. And regardless if I decide to run again or go do something else, I will still be all prepared to know that this is the way it has to be done. So right now my concentration is doing the best I can where I am.
I think so. What are you going to do about holding a job when you're not being a legislator? I'm really prying a lot here, but you are an attorney. You will continue private practice then, that is?
Yes, and I am now. I mean, I have some cases, those cases that I can handle that don't require a lot of court appearances. I can hold down enough of that. I really don't like being in private practice, though. I like serving the public, and a lot depends on, but the appointments for departments are political. I mean, they're classified and unclassified positions, but a lot depends on who's in the governor's office. So I'm hoping that if I decide not to run, or I run and I lose, that I can find again a job that is that will give me an experience and a challenge. Yet I'm not the type of person that just likes to go into a tedious type thing. I like a challenge.
Tell me, do you think then that our citizen legislature is worth all of this, having to cobble together jobs?
I think the thing that I have found sort of depressing is that not anybody can run for legislature. I don't consider myself wealthy, but if I didn't have my husband, who was bringing in a substantial income and the savings that I did based upon the jobs I've had, I think it promotes those people that are either retired or have a substantial income and can afford to take off that time, or have someone else that can support them totally during that period of time, because you really get pulled in so many directions. And I think you need people that have family, that can understand the family issues and the demands of families, you need someone who's gone through it or in retirement too. So it is a high variety that you do need, but it almost promotes that person who can sustain on their own. And I don't think you can ever say to a person.
You have to be sure and ask her how Jan likes being a legislative wife.
That's my husband. We've already talked about the fact that Jan just wasn't too thrilled with the campaign.
He put up a very private person.
Yes. He put up signs during the primary, but made it perfectly clear he wouldn't even do that during the general. So,
Don't draw a line; it takes over.
Yeah. Well, I've been in sort of the public image for a long time, and he had gotten used to not having everything exposed publicly, you know. So, getting back into that, it's.
Well, let me ask you then, as the beginning of a wrap-up, you'll be pleased to hear. What is it costing you to be in the legislature? And when I say that, I mean any way that cost can mean, emotionally, financially, if you had to sum it up.
Well, financially it's costing but because of where I've gone to the last 2 years, to me it's not been a financial burden that I couldn't handle and I was willing to take on, because it's been worth the experience and the opportunity of serving the public. So that hasn't bothered me as much, though it's put more pressure on Jan. And that can also relate to a relationship that is a little more stressful. What it has caused, some of it, is a higher anxiety level. And I've been in professions in which, in the DA's office, there was high anxiety there because jury trials and dealing with 150 caseload that were very, very serious was, of course, a go. And I guess part of that might have been that I didn't have children, or I just started a young family in '79, and I'd already been in the DA's office for 6 years at that point. So the high anxiety at this point is just trying to be that super person, you know, that society has made us. And I saw my mother as a superwoman, and I grew up thinking that we could have it all. And sometimes just releasing that to myself is it's okay if you can't handle it all. It's okay if you say, my house is not going to be clean this week, or guys, if I don't make it to your school PTA meeting this afternoon, I'm sorry, but there is another priority. And being able to explain and communicate to them but also being able to turn around and say to my fellow legislators, I won't be at that reception because it's more important for me to be at my son's Azuki violin lesson. And when you see a person who has not had family for a while or never has had family, think, then why did she win? Why would she do this? If she's not willing to commit herself 100%, then she shouldn't be here. And I don't believe that. I believe that a person who gives still of their community and keeps that contact. It's real hard for me to even get to my noon meetings. And I think it's very important to keep in contact with all my business people, with all my friends, and with the schools, and being a room mom still. But I guess that's the anxiety level where you want to be that super person, and you have to let loose of some of those and say, it's okay if I don't get it all done perfectly.
Could you do this if you didn't live in Topeka? Could you be a commuting legislator at this point in your life?
Well, last night when I was talking to some of the freshmen, I said, I can see where it would be a very big benefit not to be in Topeka, because though it would be hard because you'd be separated from your family, you would be going away for a period of time that your family would know you were separated for 3 months, and you basically could stay at the Campbell and do all your work all night, and there'd be no reason to go back home, no family obligations, no community obligations. You could go to the receptions, yet at the same time, the stress it must be causing on them, and then having to go back every weekend, because you still have to have that constituent thing, would be burdensome. So they've got it good and bad. I mean, when I was on the Pro Board and towards the end of the 5 years, when I started, we were only overnight in the state, two to 3 nights. By the time I ended, and the hearings had increased so tremendously, we were away from home up to 6 and 7 nights a month, which when we went to Hutchinson, we were there the entire week.
Mm-hmm.
I left on Monday morning at 5 a.m. and I got home 7 or 9 o'clock on Friday night. The good thing, the good thing about that was that I went to hearings in the morning. We worked hard, 8 and 9 and 10 hours, but I came home to a motel and collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
There was no, got to get the bath, got to get to bed, got to do this, got to read, got to get the homework done. Yet the strain was also thinking, gosh, my husband's at home having to do this all by themselves. The guilt aspect, I should be with my children, I should be doing this. So it was good and bad.
So even if your husband doesn't put up yard signs, he does count as a pretty supportive husband here.
Oh, heck yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think when Jan and I married, we knew that both of us, what we wanted together in life, as far as he knew he didn't want, though he had grown up in a family where his mother never worked, and his mother really didn't want me to work.
Mm-hmm.
I was acceptable as a teacher, I was not as a lawyer. And there were many indications during the time that when we started our family, that I should be home.
Mm-hmm.
Jan wasn't looking for that type of person, and there was a very big understanding throughout that time. The support aspect was there. So no, there was no way that I could have achieved what I did without either having a real anger or just saying I can't have what I want, without his support. So no, he's been a cheerleader the whole way through.
Sounds good. I got a cleanup question. We have started asking everyone what committees they wanted, what committees they got, what strategy they had. And now I'm adding, and do you think committees are that important? So let me ask you, did you get the committees you wanted? What did you want? What did you get?
Yes, I did. Initially, I had gotten one committee I didn't want, which was transportation. I think I would have learned a lot out of it, but it was not one of my priorities. But I wanted judiciary. I wanted federal and state affairs, which I got, and governmental organizations is 3 committees I wanted. If I didn't get Fed and State Affairs, I had also requested Public Health and Welfare. So again, that was the real advantage of being in the majority party, and also having the background I had, that I was given those 3 committees. Initially, I'd been given Transportation instead of Federal, State, and Affairs, and thought, well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. But then someone wanted off of that and into transportation, so I was asked if I wanted to. So, and I think committee assignments are extremely important because that's where the work goes on. That's where you can really give your expertise and your background. That's where you can get to know your colleagues more as to what they stand for. And that's where also you have better knowledge as to telling your constituents what's really going on.
That's interesting. Well, let me ask you, is there something you thought I'd ask you that I haven't, something I should have asked you you'd like to have on the record?
No. I guess the only thing that I really didn't touch very much was that my experience in the district attorney's office for 9 years was probably what got me where I was as far as issues and fighting for people's causes. At that point, I was the first woman assistant DA, and I fought in an area, though I was considered a feminist. I didn't approach it on a feminist basis, as far as just I fought it as just a person. You got whoever's here and doing it, and I will do my job regardless if you think a woman isn't doing their job. I was in an area where women had not tried it. I mean, I've always been in a profession where women were not considered the proper person to be in the profession. Where jury trials were, when I started in the adult court in 1975, I'd been with the DA's office in 73, did juvenile. That was, again, acceptable for the women to be there. When I was then asked to go into the adult court and handle the sexual offenses, where trials were normally occurring like once every 3 to 6 months on rape cases or child molestation trials, as soon as I became the assistant DA, I was trying cases as many as 3 to 4 a month. And we're talking very highly emotional, strong cases, because we're talking rape cases, sexual molestation cases. And one reason was they were trying me out, seeing if I could handle juries, trying to see if a woman could really present themselves in court. Many defense attorneys made the mistake of always referring to me as the woman, and will you give her extra attention because she's a woman and she's a blonde woman. And I'll never forget one attorney in Kansas City, and Justice McFarland and I have spoken about this, because she was the district judge at that point, and he never called me by name throughout the entire trial, nor any of the other women in the trial, but kept referring to me as the pretty little blonde, and Eileen Burnell, who was a very professional KBI agent, the sweet young thing from the KBI. It was also the first time that we were challenging the rape shield law in Kansas as far as in Shawnee County, and he assumed again that he would get his way because he was an experienced trial attorney. We had just got the bill passed, and I had helped with the legislation with Senator Jan Meyer, who was one of the only women senators over here.
And became a woman representative to Congress later, yes, okay.
That he just assumed that he would get his way, and then challenged it in the Supreme Court, saying that it was because of all the women and the woman judge and everything that he didn't get his fairness in this rape trial, and lost it royally as well as the trial. So, plus I was pregnant during a lot of trials too, and that was quite an experience. The time I was pregnant with my first son, I went into labor during the closing argument, and Judge Barber was the judge, and my Lamaze classes I turned out to have C-section, but my Lamaze classes came in handy. And it's the first time probably I've ever had jurors come up and hug me. They didn't know I was in labor. Went in the next day, but again, the jurors said, we decided that, God, this must really be a serious case if they put a woman as pregnant as you are on the case. Yet during my pregnancy, when I was 3 and 4 and 5 months, it was the women on the juries that were very judgmental. They just thought it was awful that a pregnant woman would be in court, that I would do something as horrible as this to my baby. So, went through a lot of that aspect of dealing with that.
So, you really aren't a freshman in some ways. You are in the legislature, but this legal background really has just given you a lot of experience that has prepared you really to be here and so on.
Yeah, and that's what also gets frustrating at times too, because since you've worked the real world and you've seen it happen, and you say that's not the way it occurs, sometimes you just want to say, please believe me, this is the way it is. Yeah.
Now, this is interesting to me because here you go to law school, not by accident, but you're on your way to taking a legal stenographer course, so to speak, and you end up in law school. And then, out of that, you end up doing this, up until recently, usually masculine kind of law. What happened? Was it an accident, or at some point did you just say, this is who I am, I want it, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to talk them into letting me do it?
You mean, was it an accident that I got where I was?
Yeah, prosecutor as opposed to defender, not legal aid, not all those images which are slightly more female.
I think it was an accident, but I found that I really liked it. I mean, I would have been the last one who expected myself to be a trial lawyer. My husband was the debater and the top one, and who really wanted to be the trial lawyer. But what happened was I was in the courthouse. Again, in law school, I was involved in children's issues as a volunteer probation officer. And Judge Honeyman at that point had a real difficult little girl, and I was a volunteer big brother, big sister. And he asked me if I would take her on as a case, and we still communicate. She was 11 years old at that time. It had already been in juvenile court twice for theft, and because she was stealing to feed her family. And got very involved in that program, really liked it, really saw the injustice done to children, and that's why I had gone into law school, because as a teacher it just wasn't enough. I wasn't doing enough to say, what's going on here? Why aren't we doing this for children? And again, I guess it's coming from the community where well, I was saying, you know, I guess it comes from, as I grew up, the family and the children issue and the unit or verifying what we could do was so important. And as I was teaching, it just, there wasn't enough done. And so as I went to law school, during the time I was in law school, there were times in which I think, why am I not teaching? I mean, it was very difficult. School had been pretty easy for me. In undergraduate school, law school was very difficult. It was just sort of an average, a little above average in law school, but I was used to being much better than that. So it was also a humiliating process. And then while I was in law school and was at, like I said, the county clerk's office, just trying to get through law school and helping pay for it, is when Judge Honeyman asked me to do this. And I really liked the advocacy aspect of it. And then I became the volunteer rape program started in Topeka in 1974, and I was one of the first volunteer counselors for that, along with Bonnie Buckley. And who would have ever, you know, here I was going to be a home ec teacher, and I still sew all the time for relief, and loved it very much, and love it very much, still do costumes and sewing for the children, and our first 5 years of marriage, my husband would never have been able to survive. We were so poor if I hadn't made all his suits, which I did, and still like to make suits, but you know, I started working with those kids, and it just made a lot of difference to me. And then I guess it's just floating into, at the time that Olander had an opening, again, he could have hired a man or me, and I just went in and said, this is child abuse cases, child neglect cases, it's what I'm really interested in. And basically it wasn't because I was so much better, it was because no man really wanted to do it. And I said, well, I'll not only do it, but I really love it, and really got into it. And it was sort of one of these situations, well, good, you just stay over here. And again, working in the sexual assault area, then I went to a conference, and when I got back, the men in the office had decided, we don't like these cases, you take them. And I said, okay. And it was just during that period of time in which those issues like acquaintance rape and sexual assault and equalizing rape of women with men was very important in our society, and I just happened to be at that time where I could really fight for it. And then with the help of Senator Meyer and support groups coming out into your communities, I was just there.
But from what you say, it doesn't sound like even if you were to leave the legislature, you would necessarily be planning to return to the DA's office. Is this something that you...
I think that as long as I'm serving as serving the people and doing what I think is right and putting forth a cause, I'll be happy. And yes, I do like prosecution, but sometimes there's a real frustration again when it comes here. And I've been able to, and that's one reason I joined the Legislators too, is that if I couldn't get some bills that I thought were very important passed, and I thought, well, if I can't beat them, I'm going to join them and change the law myself.
So in a sense, you're getting to do all those things that frustrated you, and as you started out to say, you were on the other side of the fence. Yeah,
an example was just like yesterday. We did a victims' rights bill for the task force for victims' rights, and I had the victims come up here, but then I got to present my case as a representative. And we don't know that it will pass through just because I'm a representative, but it does add some weight to it.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how you grow and change, but this has been a lot of fun, and thank you.
Thank you.